All right, we're gonna go live in 1 minute. Okay, 3 seconds, okay? 3, 2, 1. Okay, we're gonna give 60 seconds for people to log in. So well.
Okay. Hello, my friends and relatives. Welcome to our evening's presentation. I have the honor of welcoming you to our second annual Honoring Indigenous Voices event. Tonight plans on being a beautiful evening for us to come together, and I want to begin in a good way. My name is Christina Roberts. I am an associate professor of English here at Seattle University, and I also have the honor of directing Indigenous Peoples Institute. Before we begin, it's important for us to acknowledge the lands that we are sharing, the lands that are unceded and occupied, the unceded lands of the Coast Salish people. As we do a land acknowledgement, it is to move beyond a performative gesture towards acknowledging these stolen lands. And it's intended to invite us into a deeper place of reflection, to think about the types of relationships and the work we are going to be doing moving forward into our collective future. As I mentioned, today is an important event for us to gather, and I want to emphasize a couple of things in an effort to get us started in a good way. One is coming to me from Thomas King, a writer who I enjoy thoroughly and love sharing any chance I get. And he offers a couple of things for us to think about. There is no truth, only stories. And if we want a different ethic, we tell a different story. Tonight, we have an opportunity to listen and learn alongside one another as stories are shared, as we take time to open ourselves up to listening to stories that might be painful, stories that might be difficult, but also stories that inspire us to be relatives into the future and imagine the collective work that we can undertake alongside one another. As I mentioned, I direct Indigenous Peoples Institute here at Seattle U, and I'm honored to have the opportunity to present this second annual gathering in an effort to amplify Indigenous voices and perspectives and share them broadly with students, faculty, staff, and community members beyond Seattle University. IPI's mission is to provide a home away from home experience for Indigenous students at Seattle U, and it's also intended to create a space, a necessary space to ensure that Indigenous voices are heard, recognized, and incorporated into our collective visions as we move forward. In order for us to get also started in a good way, I have the honor right now of inviting Father Pat Toohey to join me at the stage to get us started in an opening prayer. Once again, thank you so much for being with us this evening, either here in person or live streamed. And thank you again for your willingness to come together and share in our heart stories. Father Pat?
Hasta si ai as huge tis a chile hurchol a stiwilchol Osi si ai rapu dish to lochlochol Dear cage Gwakwood to bush al tierslach o se be to bush sliach a Arllwys fy gwared las tigwydd, kwi ari eisiau, I kwi bach gwad raslag alari o. Wel arllw swch ti a, hwyl y beti a sysgwydir y ti. Gwebi swyd, sbatigwi sym, o'r kwi lwslag ydw ti a hasgwy gwared. Dyg sa teir, sbatigwi sym, sbatigwi tagol a si. Glom assista. Dear friends, I'm so glad we could be here together tonight, all around. Thank you for all who have come. Make a prayer tonight. For mercy, for pity, for strength, to be helped by the Most Holy. It is wonderful to share good words here with our relatives, all of our dear ones. These good words that we share lift us, lift our spirits, our inmost being. They lift us up with strength. This is wonderful. And we pray that it will always be this way when we meet. Sishoy Adibel Shushabab de Sil Talbihu Talawa Still Jake. Shushabab de Sil Talbihu. We are also in need of mercy for one another, compassion and love. We are also in need. And so we pray tonight for this gift of great compassion for all of us here and for all who are listening in. Si Am and Si Ai.
Thank you, Father Pat. Next, I would love to invite Vice President Natasha Martin to the stage to share her words and her wisdom with us this evening.
I am truly honored to be with you this evening. For those of you physically with us this evening and those of you who are with us virtually, I am honored to be with you for honoring Indigenous voices, interweaving the work of storytelling and its relationship to inner growth. And thank all of those who had a hand in bringing part 2 of honoring Indigenous voices to fruition. Student leaders, staff, and faculty leaders, including Dr. Christina Roberts, the director of the Indigenous Peoples Institute, and whose imprint through this work makes a significant contribution to our university. Thank you to all of those who will be so generously sharing your stories this evening. I bring greetings also from the Office of the President, who sends his deep regret for not being able to be here this evening. As the university's Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion, who believes that our greatest potential lies in our ability to build a university where all who live, learn, and work here can thrive, not just survive. This evening's program is extremely significant. A necessary ingredient to being able to thrive in academic spaces, alongside community members, and particularly ones with a mission of inclusive academic excellence of educating the whole person as Seattle University, it is the ability to tell your stories on your own terms, and not for the enviable gaze of others, but for yourselves, to allow us all to remember who we are. Amplifying voices and storytelling is indispensable to healing, to growth, to resistance, to resilience, and justice. At such a complicated time in our nation's history, it is important that the voices on this evening's subject, the atrocities that occurred at the boarding schools across Canada and the United States be amplified. As a Black woman and the descendant of enslaved peoples, I bring my whole self to this evening's event, knowing that I stand on the shoulders of all of those Indigenous people and enslaved African people who suffered at the hands of colonization. You have my deep regard this evening. I am here as a guest, and I join in this space with gratitude as a listener and as a learner, offering my support and solidarity to each of you. We are all products of a complicated history of these native lands. We are colonization's offspring, and its manifestations are encoded into our minds, our bodies, and spirits in significant ways. All while we work to open our hearts and move forward amid our individual pain, our collective trauma, and the entrenched systemic issues that we face. As a university, we have an obligation to seek truth, to deepen understanding, to grow knowledge. That is what education is all about. As a university, we chart a pathway to reconciliation by facilitating learning, research, and creative works, and community collaboration, all based on truth. And importantly, as a Jesuit Catholic university, we have a special obligation to honestly grapple with these truths. Jesuits are not immune to their role in the boarding school atrocities, as we now know. Just as Georgetown University has set about to understand and reconcile its history in the slavery of people of African descent and as slave owners through what they title Georgetown Reflects on Slavery, Memory, and Reconciliation, which includes the Georgetown Slavery Archive and other endeavors. Georgetown University describes itself as, and I quote, engaged in a long-term and ongoing process to more deeply understand and respond to the university's role in the injustice of slavery and the legacies of enslavement and segregation in our nation, end quote. Similarly, the harmful legacies of the Indian boarding schools and the participation of the Jesuits must fully be brought to light. To acknowledge these harmful legacies in relation to Indigenous peoples, to acknowledge the imperfections and complicity of the Catholic Church, the doctrine of discovery and boarding and residential schools, and to do so with extended hands and open hearts. An invitation to do the work of repair and restoration of relationships together. Because we cannot change or reconcile, for that matter, that which we don't understand, regard, or see. So tonight is about being both seen and heard. The boarding of First Nation and Native children at schools was intended not only to suppress their native language, culture, and sacred spirituality, but its impact had far-reaching implications, generational impacts that cannot be understated. A 2019 article in The Atlantic titled, I quote, "Death by Civilization," end quote, by Mary Annette Pember begins this way as I close. And the quote is this: "My mother died while surviving civilization. Although she outlived a traumatic childhood, immersed in its teachings, she carried the pain of those lessons for her entire life," end quote. It is this intergenerational trauma that we must continue to unearth, recognize, and reckon with. We tell these stories this evening to save ourselves and to disrupt the cycle of what Pember titled Death by Civilization. I honor you and I thank you for allowing me to be among you this evening.
Thank you, Vice President Martin, for your beautiful words, contributing to getting us started in a good way in the long work ahead for all of us. Thank you. I now have the honor to introduce our first speaker. Yatel Huet is her true name, passed to her from her granny, Cecile. Her name, roughly translated, means woman who gives of herself. Anna Hansen is her American name. She is the oldest of 6 children. Her mother is Grace August, member of the Shishalt Nation in British Columbia, Canada, and Bernardino Rinonos from the Ilocano people, indigenous to Bagnaton La Union of the Philippine Islands. Yatel Anna's life work has been helping individuals, families, communities, and agencies understand the profound impact of historical trauma and ongoing colonization on a nation's health and wellness. She has worked throughout the United States, Canada, and in Australia and North Ireland. Her work is centered on extending an invitation to help create trauma-wise homes, communities, and workplaces while growing cultural humility, empathy, compassion, and caring of self, community, nation, and Mother Earth. It is her belief that it will take all of us working and healing together to create a safe world for the children of today and tomorrow. Yatel has 17 grandchildren and lives with her husband on Bainbridge Island. She has an MA in psychology from Seattle University and a post-MA specialization training for certification in existential analysis and logotherapy. In addition to all of these beautiful words, Anna has shaped my journey already in incredible ways, and I'm deeply honored to have this opportunity to share time with her and with all of you. Anna, hello.
Thank you. Thank you, Christina. It's an honor to be here and hear those good words that help us start off this evening together. I'm going to speak a little bit more about the storytelling and what our roles are. And we'll be putting up on the screen is it on? Okay. Sorry. Can you let me know if that's on the full screen?
Can you hear me, Anna?
I can.
Yes, we can see it now. So we see you in a little box and we see your PowerPoint presentation.
Can you put it into presentation mode? The bottom right button.
Thank you, Misty.
You're welcome. Okay, you're good to go.
Yes, it's a very different way to gather. to be on a screen in front of you, but I'm very honored to come in this way, and hopefully these words will add to the words that have already been shared. I'll talk a little bit about the relationship between the storyteller, the story, and the listener, that those are all interrelated, and it's important in this time of truth telling that we're in, that we understand these stories that are being shared tonight, and that there is a role for both the storyteller and the listener. So I'm going to add a little bit to what our vice president said there in terms of the listener's role as part of a community member is certainly to do the listening, but I'm going to add a little piece to it and take privilege as an elder to invite you to think and feel and hear throughout these three stories, that I'm going to ask these questions. What did you see? What did you hear? And how did that make you feel? How did you feel? Because at the end, we will do a group discussion that what is necessary is for the listeners to listen to their hearts in the dialogue. Too often we're told to figure stuff out in our head, or have the storyteller be the one that gives meaning to a story, whereas it actually is a pretty dynamic experience. And so I want to thank you for just being here and listening. I'm going to start off with this image of the Americas. And this is an image of pre-contact area before the settlers came. And you can see in the Americas that there were human beings throughout the land, living and taking care of the land. Each of those groups have had different creation stories in terms of how they were placed there and what they were responsible for. As sea shelf people, we have a creation story that tells us why we were placed there and how to take care of the land. And I've traveled to different areas, and it's very similar in other places. So the important thing is just to see that there were human beings here. And for my people, the sea shelf people, I want to show this image of my relatives 4,000 years ago. This is a digital making of the human beings that were found in a midden that was behind one of our chief's homes. And he was having his sewer put in, and they found, the ones who were digging found these beads that came spilling out of the area they were digging in. And so they stopped right away and decided that this was most possibly a burial ground of some sort. And what they uncovered was definitely a burial ground of a family, and possibly a big house, and which was a cultural spiritual gathering place. And you see the man has a beaded clothing, and those are like thousands and thousands of beads that were put together for his clothing. So we have stories that go back thousands of years, and this was so cool to then also see the faces from 4,000 years ago that went with the stories that so many of our storytellers carry. So at the time of contact with Europeans, the sea shelf people There was quite a few of us, and we're known as peaceful people. And there were some 80 scattered villages in different sites in the Seychelles territory. It's estimated that there was about, the lowest one was 5,000 people, but in looking at all the sites and looking at all the families, they're thinking that it's over 25,000 people that were there by the time of the, and by the time of the first census in 1881, the Seychelles population had plunged to 167 people. When I heard this, I was overwhelmed and taken aback. I couldn't place that inside my head or my heart in terms of how did our people with so much tremendous loss. And I know that today we're going through this in so many parts of the world where literally thousands of people are dying from this pandemic, because we were dying from the epidemic that came into our territory when the settlers came. And there are stories too of when those settlers purposely brought infected blankets in to get rid of us. And so I start this so that you see that the people that are going to be speaking, and myself and the ones who put this together, have family that date back hundreds and thousands of years, because so many of our teachings have to do with having been here since time immemorial, and that's a long time. What happened for us, and this has been so over the last many years, I've been doing this work since the late 70s, early 80s, in terms of trying to put words to what had happened to us as a people and what had happened to Indigenous people. And what we're talking about in terms of what Christina was talking about, and the Vice President was talking about, in terms of just the horrific experience of colonization, genocide, and epidemics. How I framed this when I first started talking about this was that it was like tsunamis, a tsunami hitting our villages. First was the impact of colonization and genocide. Genocide meaning that we were needed to be taken out because we were in the way. We were actually on the land that was wanted by the settlers. And those epidemics almost took the Seychelles people out. Another wave, a tsunami, a huge wave that just was wiping people out too, was the outline of culture, religion, and language. We have stories of we have stories of what happened when it was outlawed, of all the elders, the ones who sang and the ones who carried the stories and all the regalia that was there in Seychelles. The people had to dig a big hole and put everything that was important to them, that was telling and reminding us about our connection to the earth and the connection to one another, the ceremonies and the prayers and the songs, and they couldn't be sung or said, or what would happen is you would be arrested and taken, and sometimes we didn't know where the people were taken. The other tsunami that hit our villages was the political systems that were imposed. Now, all the Indigenous people on the lands in the Americas and other parts of the world already had political systems that were working. It was that's why we can go back to time immemorial. That's why we can say 4,000 years ago, here are my relatives, because those systems worked. They had to do with understanding the interconnection between the families, the interconnection that has to do with the earth, and the beauty of praying and singing and helping one another and being grateful for that which the Creator has given us. And so another huge tsunami, and this was even bigger, if one can imagine that, was when the children were taken away. The children were stolen and put into the residential schools. The United States assisted Canada in dealing with the Indian problem. And when they asked, what was shared was what we've learned here is that the children are central to these communities, these tribes, and that if we take the children away, it will break them. And that's is exactly what happened. The story of the residential schools are only starting to come out, and it has been an incredible process for even me to want to find out what happened to my mother and my grandmother and all of my relatives, because my mother ran away from that residential school and ran away to the United States. So it was tremendous amounts of land were taken, which had an impact because there was an area where women used to go and have women's ceremonies, but that got taken. There was areas where medicine was grown and taken care of, and then that was taken. So very central ways of how we took care of ourselves were taken away, and we couldn't go into those areas. When those kinds of ways of being that promote health and well-being and interconnection are taken away, it impacts health tremendously. And so even today, from way back when to today, the health inequity that happens with the Indigenous people is huge. We have the highest rates of disease and illness, and they're tied to stress on the body that have to do with the kinds of stress that originated from these waves, tsunami waves that kept taking and taking and taking. And this today, there continues to be ongoing racism and oppression that continues to harm. I was in a class not 10 years ago, and so that was it wasn't that long ago, and I was sharing Indigenous ways of knowing in terms of understanding the psychological action that the professor was talking about, and I had to translate it in terms of what I was told in terms of how he was framing it. And so I was having a dialogue with him, and one of the students said, raised her hand, and she said, "Why do we spend so much time with Anna?" And Anna's talking about Indigenous people. All of us here know about Indigenous people, and we all know the history here. And it's taking away from learning about the psychology that is going to be important to us as counselors. That had a tremendous impact on me because I'd been with this group for about almost a year, and a connection had been built. And then I was relegated to a place of invisibility by those few words. And I was pushed to a place of non-existence, or an existence only in the past, and that everybody knew me, which is impossible, which made me invisible. So there are all of these little ways that begin to make one invisible when it is not true. We're here, we are alive. I have children, I have grandchildren, But the harm that comes from that has such a brutal impact. And that's what we're wanting to heal from today by putting names to what has occurred, and also into allowing a grieving process that's so necessary, because these are intangible losses and they're losses that continue. And grief is a normal response to loss. And even today, getting ready for this time to share with you, I was thinking in terms of remembrance, that I'm telling this story on behalf of my mother and my grandmother and my grandfather, my aunties who were not able to tell their stories. But I listened enough to have a few of those stories and use my time here as Yatahowit to share with you the beauty of a people that is literally not seen. And it hurts my heart. And because I'm now an elder, and I worry about my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren, that they need to see and hear the beauty of where they come from and who they are, because as human beings, we're quite necessary to this world. This boarding school was the residential school's form of erasure, where my auntie was telling me of at the school there that she went to up in Seychelles, that they were testing how long children could last without food or water. And there are a lot of children that got sick, and there were children who died. And also medications that were used, and children were lost, died also from those tests. My mother had great trouble signing a piece of paper for me to get a polio shot back in the 50s, and any of the other shots, because she was afraid that the school was going to try to erase me and take me away. The schools had so many. I worked with residential school survivors and boarding school survivors, and here in the U.S., in Canada, in Australia, and have heard the stories of torture and horror that no child should ever have experienced. After doing this all these years, I feel still, and I think it's very necessary for all of us to have these feelings, because it was wrong and it harmed too many. Every one of my relations, almost all, became alcoholic or addicted to something, including myself, that I quit drinking in 82 because I was slowly starting to kill myself. But these feelings on the inside that I couldn't name or understand, and my mother and my grandmother and my whole family couldn't name or understand, had its impact on us. And for a short while, that alcohol helped, and then it stopped helping, and we just continued to die. Okay, I'm going to ask you all to take a deep breath with me, please. I'm glad that I can say these words and have these tears on behalf of my mother and all my relations who weren't able to. And I know that in the place they are now, they are helping me with these words. And it has never been easy to share these stories for anyone who begins to speak of their residential and boarding school experience. What we are so aware of is that settler colonialism has bleached, whitewashed out the history of the Indigenous people. That it's only now starting to be acknowledged. Like tonight, I heard the acknowledgement of the United States was built on settler colonialism, and that impact continues. And the goal of settler colonialism is different because what its role is to completely replace the Indigenous people with the people from the invading group. And so that almost happened with us, with only 167 people. And I think we now number in the thousands, 1,000. It's more, and we're thank heavens here. Settler colonialism created an identity for a colonizer, and at the same time created an identity for the colonized. That identity for us as Indigenous people was the backwardness, the primitive, being not very smart, being like an animal. And we did not think of animals as bad. I'm part of a wolf clan, and there's great beauty and many teachings and stories from the wolf people. Okay, so I want to just say that the settler colonialism is still deeply in our present day and informs how we understand the past. That's why this time of colonial of anti-colonial effort to raise up Indigenous voices to tell the truth is so valuable. And for all of you listeners out there who are taking the time to listen with your hearts, I raise my hands to you and I thank you for that. This time that we're in is naming and healing from the genocide that occurred. These are images I want you to see. My family members from the left is my mother, who's the one who ran away from boarding school, and then going from her left is my father, who was from the Philippines, and he was colonized. The Philippines was colonized by the Spanish, the Japanese, and the United States. So colonization is rich on very much both sides of my family. The picture below my father is my Auntie Pat. That's me as a little girl. It's interesting. I got a cowboy outfit, but I loved it. And my Auntie Pat went to the school. And then off to the right there is my Auntie Margaret, the older sister in the choral shirt, who has taught me so much. And the other pictures are my brothers and sisters, because we're all impacted. And then the picture below is a picture of my kids and some of my cousins when they were little, just to show you that there is an intergenerational impact. And there's many of us in the family, in all of our families, trying to heal and connect and bring those teachings back that help us stay connected as a people. I know I'm running out of time, so I'll go through this quickly. At home in Sechelt right now, there's a project called the Siaya Project. Siaya is a word that is used when we're talking, like I call Christina, I call Misty, Siaya. They're my relatives, and they hold a place in my heart like a relative, and meaning that it cannot be removed. You hold a place in my heart that cannot be removed. And so in 2015, the statue here was put up as a monument to honor the survivors. There was a huge, beautiful ceremony, and a lot of the survivors came up to share their stories for the first time. And that's this ongoing healing and much grieving that's occurring, and the ceremonies that are being done on our behalf. That last picture is my cousin Tony, who's a master carver. He's carving a totem pole. It's a remembrance totem pole, and it acknowledges those first children that walked through those residential school doors in 1904. And one of them was my Granny Cecile, whose name I carry, and a relative, Paul is his last name, a boy, the first boy. So these are reminders to us that we are in a time of remembrance and grieving, and that it's going to take all of us to do this. And here is a gathering that was in our gathering house. It's called a big house. It's where the ceremonies are done. And the Seychelles people, the non-native people, the white people there are coming together and wanting to support the healing that is there. And beautiful words were said at this ceremony when a woman said, you know, this isn't a healing that is just for the Seychelles people. It's for us, the settlers, that we must heal, all heal together. And this is the time that we're in. So I'm thanking you all for giving opportunity to share these few words, and even to share these tears that are coming forth, because they're needed, and they will wash away the hurt that has happened. And this is the time where we all will be learning and leaning on each other, because we need each other, and the earth needs us. We have to be connected with each other so that we can fully acknowledge the connection to the earth and take care of the earth, because it's taken care of us for thousands and thousands of years. I want to end this short sharing with you by just holding up my hands to you, and just to remind you in a gentle way that at the end we will, my invitation to you is to think in terms of, what did I hear? What did I see? How did that make me feel in our discussion time? So thank you all for the time and for lifting my heart by your listening. Okay, I'm just needing to take a moment here, because I am going to introduce a beautiful human being, our next speaker, Brooke Pinkham. And I was thinking of how to introduce a beautiful human being, and what I know is that she has two beautiful children that she loves very much, and I was able to see them virtually. She has a husband whom she loves very much, and who loves her and who supports her in the work that she does in terms of understanding Indian law. And this is a huge, huge knowing that she has in terms of law, because there's billions of books about the laws, and we need ones who can do this and to help us. It is an absolute honor to introduce you to, again, a beautiful human being, Brooke Pinkham, Nimipu woman who's raised on the Confederated Tribes of Yakima. So, Brooke, thank you.
Thank you, Anna, for that beautiful introduction. I also just wanted to extend my gratitude to Misty and, of course, Christina for creating this space and allowing us to share our stories. And I have to say, it's interesting. Anna and I didn't necessarily talk about the details of our what we're going to say tonight, but I think what I'm going to share follows pretty nicely with what she shared. And even though we are of separate generations, I think that we have very similar experiences as Indigenous people. So it was still dark outside when my dad woke me from sleep. I had been sleeping on the floor of the bedroom I shared with my 3 siblings. I'm pretty sure I had my own bed at that time, but I had just grown accustomed to sleeping on the floor from the years prior. At the time, we lived in a pretty modest-sized home that was built by my great-grandmother Elsie and my great-grandfather Alex, I think in the 1950s or the 1960s. It was probably at 5 or 6 in the morning. I think it was in the spring or in the fall. My dad had promised my brother to join him on a cross-country trip from our home on the Yakima Res to Portland, Oregon. Maybe that wasn't so cross-country, but I like to think back like that. My brother, unfortunately, he couldn't be awakened that early in the morning, so I was the backup traveler. I think my dad knew for whatever reason I was down for the trip, no matter how little I had slept that night. We were traveling on his motorcycle after all, so it made it that much more enticing. I'd only been on the back of Dad's motorcycle a few times and on very short rides, but this was cross country. Dad said we had to hurry because he had already spent so much time trying to wake my brother. And I think he was on a deadline. I think he was traveling for work. I can't remember all the details. My dad was and still is a civil engineer at the time for the Bureau of Indian Affairs through the Yakima Agency. He now works directly for the tribe. But it was early. I was half asleep, wrapped in layers of clothing and a pretty badass motorcycle helmet. It was cold on our journey at first, but holding on to my dad kept me warm. The freedom that I felt on the back of that motorcycle and the wind, it was such a fond memory. It's a fond memory I hold on to because I like to think of it as one that added to my eventual independence. I like to hold on to it because it reminds me that even though we had hard times, we also had fun memories. I have so many fond childhood memories with my siblings and my cousins and my grandparents, my aunties and my uncles. I was a whole person with my family. I was born into a strong family heritage. From my dad's side, we descend from Chief Joseph, leader of the Wallowa band of the Nimipu, the Nez Perce. On my mom's side, from German immigrants who made their way likely through the Depression. I don't believe my ancestral legacy to be unique, but I like to believe in this narrative as a starting point to regaining my personal healing. Because between that starting point and now, my legacy is also entwined with harsh memories, with loss and trauma and addiction and suffering. But still memories nonetheless that have contributed to who I am. And like Anna, it's taken me a long time to name these feelings and emotions. College was a pivotal moment. My transition from home, from my community, from my rooted connection with a physical space, and plucked and transplanted into an entirely different ecosystem. I mean, literally from the desert to the rainforest. I was ill-prepared. I left home, a high-achieving student, academically speaking. I went through my first bout of depression in college, not realizing it was depression at the time. That affected everything, my relationships, my experiences, my grades. I was no doubt in culture shock. I was not adequately prepared on expectations. Rather, their system was not made for me. College was not adequately prepared for me, for someone like me. One of the emotions attached to depression is anger. That's what I've been learning. I've had a lot of anger and I still do, but at least now I can name it and also have somewhat of a better control over it. At first, I was angry at my parents. Why were you teenage parents? And then at my high school teachers and counselors. Why didn't you guys teach my culture and my people's history? We lived on the Yakima Res, for crying out loud. And then my college teachers and counselors. How did you create and foster an academic community that doesn't know about Native people? But now I'm angry, mostly, at the historical circumstances that have led me to this moment, to that moment rather. I'm angry at the unnecessary trauma and the fact that those before me have had to fight so hard to simply maintain their livelihoods. The unnecessary disruption to my family legacy, and not just to mine, of course, as you learned from Anna, but to my entire community. I'm angry that my grandfather had to struggle with addiction, that many of our grandfathers had to struggle with addiction. I'm angry at what caused our grandmothers and our aunties to struggle with loss of their children and their family and their language. I still struggle with that anger. I don't know that I will ever not be angry. But I do know that this is my path to healing. And what's helped me cope are stories. Whether telling stories or listening to them. Whether it's factual stories about my childhood or creation stories of coyote finding their place in the world. I'm a huge science fiction fan. Fantasy is attractive because you get to use your imagination and you can make up your own story and escape for a while. And then science. Science is just cool. Science is something believable and more concrete and often conclusive. I used to imagine myself as a superhero, but not out loud. I was too shy for that. In my head, I was a superhero who would wipe out hate and litter. I didn't like litter. I imagined myself as a Jedi, waving my hand to make food appear. Waving my hand to make that gross guy leave me alone. Grandpa tells us stories each time we visit. And the same exact stories every time we visit, since I was a little girl. I used to think Grandpa was losing his memory because he told us the same stories every time. But what I came to realize is that he was actually teaching us to memorize those stories so that we'll pass them down as they were passed to him, so that our legacy lives on. Grandpa tells us, you see these mountains? These are your mountains. You see this river? This river belongs to you. He also tells us stories of when he ran his family's farm at a young age. Of his brother who, on his first day of military boot camp, became a platoon leader because he was the only one who already knew the drills from being in boarding school. Being a lawyer feels like the closest thing to being a superhero. I mean, sure, there are other professions that could rise to this level, such as a nurse, but I personally cannot stand the sight of blood. And while I might be the first in my family with a documented law degree, I'm not the first to know or study the law extensively. There's so many before me, I'm sure, in a desperate attempt to preserve the livelihoods of our people, have studied and memorized treaties and contracts, common law and policies. Laws that were often not in our favor, nor had us in mind. Thankfully, things have shifted since then, and I stand on the shoulders of so many who have helped carve our way to self-determination. Self-determination is true recognition that tribes and tribal governments and tribal people are sovereign nations with inherent rights to not only govern their own people, but who understand their people, to create justice systems that correlate to our cultural norms and beliefs around justice. This system has proved so effective time and time again. Out of this so-called self-determination era, as it's called in federal Indian law, came the Indian Child Welfare Act. If you're a law student or a lawyer, this is a very important statute to know. ICWA is a federal statute that aims to keep Native children with Native families and as close as possible to their Native culture. ICWA was born out of a need to address the overrepresentation of Native children being removed from their homes. Since its implementation in 1978, we've seen a great deal of progress. Of course, there's always room for more. ICWA is currently under threat. There are some out there who hope to dismantle this federal statute in hopes really to dismantle tribes. That's scary. And I urge all of you to learn more. I became a lawyer for this reason, to use the tools available to fight back and protect. This is my responsibility, because Native children are still overrepresented in the foster care system. In fact, Washington State has one of the highest rates of Native children in foster care. This is a way to continue the breaking up of Native families and the breaking of Native spirit. I am going to end, I just realized I'm probably ending earlier than I thought, but I'm going to end by reading a piece that I wrote. I wrote this about 2 years ago, but it just perfectly aligns, I think, with what we're all talking about this evening. But you'll find the text of this piece that I wrote on display at our law school's library. And it sits alongside an original Edward Curtis photograph, as well as a contemporary photograph by Native artist and photographer Will Wilson. This essay's target audience is mainly law students and lawyers, but it really applies to everyone. It applies to you. And here's what it says. Indigenous people have lived, struggled, and thrived since time immemorial. Oral stories reveal evidence of our existence back to the creation of Earth. With stories, we've kept traditions alive and maintained the health of our communities by shaping cultural etiquette and conscious relationship with others and our natural environment. Storytelling is integral to Native culture. Yet for decades, stories told about Native people have not always been from a Native perspective. They've been told and shaped from the purview of a non-Native dominant lens, and although sometimes well-intentioned, that perspective has been destructive. Take, for instance, the story of Edward Curtis. And I'm just going to take a side note. For those that don't know Edward Curtis, you can maybe do a quick Google search. Surprisingly, there are people out there that don't know of Edward Curtis. Okay, back to the text. Take, for instance, the story of Edward Curtis and his paradoxical quest to record what he thought was a dying race. His desire to shed light on Native people was praiseworthy, yet Curtis's retelling of our story was inauthentic. His sepia-toned photos of natives dressed in traditional attire, while beautiful, often left the real story outside the frame. He remained attached to depicting Native people as relics of an extinct past, and his narrative deliberately excluded evidence of Native people's ability to be both modern and authentically Indigenous. Most importantly, his misrepresentation of Native people has contributed to the erasure of Native people and culture. Yet Native people are still here, and they surround you. Indigenous lawyers and students, Indigenous scholars and physicians, athletes, scientists, musicians, artists, authors, entrepreneurs, philanthropists, and highly talented photographers. I'm also going to do a side note from this. Our very first Washington State Supreme Court Justice. And federal bench as well. We are still here. We are building stronger communities despite historical circumstances. And we continue to share our Indigenous values of reverence for elders, sharing of wealth, prioritizing family, and respect and relationship to our natural environment through the stories we tell. Telling stories is an essential part of lawyering. As a law student, you will acquire the essential tools to research and analyze stories, to dig deep for all facts, and learn to support them with strong evidence. As a lawyer, you are ethically obligated to proceed competently when advocating for your client's story. Competency requires due diligence, thorough research, close listening, and a great deal of deciphering to determine what is important in your client's story. You must view facts from all perspectives and then, only then, carefully construct a narrative. In viewing Curtis's photographs, I urge you to proceed with caution, competence, and due diligence, just as you would when investigating any story. I urge you to be mindful of language and imagery when you read about, teach about, or engage in the representation of Native people. Take the work of Edward Curtis as a cautionary lesson about how false narratives and images can ripple out in time, causing unforeseen devastation into the present. Your law degree gives you the authority. Stories you tell will be believed and passed on. Always remember the power and privilege you have as the lawyer presenting a story. Katsiaya. And I hear that we're taking a 5-minute break. Thank you, everyone. Welcome back, everyone. I now have the honor of introducing our next and last but not least speaker, Mr. Casey Nicholson. Casey is a member of the White Clay Nation of Fort Belknap Indian Reservation in north central Montana. Casey also has bloodlines tied to the Blackfeet Nation, Blood Nation, Crow Nation, Arapaho Nation, Alaska Native Nations, and Cree Nations. Casey is from Fort Belknap Indian Community and just moved from Billings, Montana, over to Puyallup, Washington. Casey has earned his BS in Health and Human Development from Montana State University, Bozeman, and attained his MS in Rehabilitation Mental Health from Montana State University, Billings. He's worked with several demographic populations and provided an array of services for each community, organization, and people he's worked for. Casey is now currently self-employed as a motivational speaker and MC, presenter, entertainer, and comedian, and acrylic artist and wellness educator. Casey was also recently brought on by the Native Wellness Institute to train and facilitate on topics dealing with historical trauma, working with Native youth and gathering of Native Americans, excuse me. Casey Nicholson has emceed, presented, and entertained for a variety of ages and backgrounds on issues both pertinent to Native and urban communities. He speaks of cultural identity issues, self-esteem issues, self-empowerment, educational endeavors, spiritual awareness, and on and on. He's also known for adding entertainment portions to his speaking engagements in order to interact with various populations, such as utilizing traditional and contemporary music, comedy, or playing the flute. I now present to you Mr. Casey Nicholson.
All right. How's it going, everybody? Going good? Right on. Hello, my name. Ohe Panita and Anisa Wasnaka, Casey Nicholson na Sihina. Inana Ani, no one Nisan. I am Casey. That's my white guy name. Casey Nicholson. I had no choice in that name, unfortunately. I came out of the womb and they said, let's just name this guy Casey. And here I am. I got a traditional name that I was named, that was passed on to me. And so I'm really proud and of that name. Yeah, I come from Fort Belmont, but I also got, like Brooke was saying, I have so many other ties to so many other different nations around the Plains area, as you see in the map there. But I also have ties to the Alaska Native Nation as well. In knowing all of that, I didn't get to know all of that until later in life, when I started asking questions about who I am. And I think a lot of us kind of go through that seeking, those seeking the answers of who I am or who you are. And to give you guys a little bit of insight, I grew up by myself, not really necessarily by myself, but as an only child. And I was raised by my mom. She was a single mother raising an only child. And on my dad's side, I had plenty of other half brothers, half sisters. That was my Blackfeet side, which I represent and love very, very much as well, from Browning, Montana. And between the Aani tribes and the Blackfeet tribes, obviously I become a mutt. And I take pride in being a mutt because I get to know who I am. And all those tribes kind of combined into this delicious, succulent, beautiful, mesmerizing body, face that you see today, the spirit, that it makes all of me. So I'm really proud of that. But at one time, I wasn't proud of that. At one time, I questioned who I was. At one time, I didn't know who I was, and it killed me inside, and I didn't know how to ask. I didn't know what questions to ask. And it was really confusing for me as a child. Give a little glimpse. Like I said, I want to get to know you. I want you guys to know who I am so that we're able to connect on some kind of level. I want you guys to give you guys that option or that possibility to get to say, hey, I know this guy a little bit more than just some speaker coming up to you and sharing some stories. But I want my stories to have a little bit of meaning, some connection with you, so that you're able to take maybe my story and share it back to your home fire, that it brings good blessings, or that there's some awareness, or that there's something that you can share with other people that you may come into contact with. Like I said before, I grew up by myself, not knowing who I was, having this cultural identity conflict. Yeah, I went to church. I did the sign of the cross. I went to confession a couple times. I didn't want to go all the time because it was weird for me, because I didn't know who was on the other side of that sheet or that wall. Plus, I had too many sins I didn't want to tell the Father. But I had a lot of things kind of going on in my life that I just didn't know. I was kind of lost. The reason why I was lost, while I felt lost, was because I was an only child. No one really taught me what it was to be Aani or Pekani or Cree or Arapaho or Alaska Native. No one was there to teach me my language, my cultural traditions. Even at one time, my grandma, she knew her language fluently, but she never taught me or my mom. I don't know why, but as a kid, you don't question, you just kind of go with the flow. And as I was sitting there one time and I heard my grandma speak, and I'm wondering, what does that mean? What is she saying to my great uncle, her brother? Not understanding this language that she was speaking. And in my mind questioning, what was that? What is that? And not really knowing, I just kind of went off and played. As I grew up, moving all over the country with my mom, from Portland, Oregon, Gallup, New Mexico, Billings, Montana, Silver Spring, Maryland, back to Fort Belknap, Montana. I had all these kind of weird kind of feelings. In Portland, Oregon, I was a white guy, even though I looked Asian Mexican. No one really knew that I was a native, and nor did I even really say, I'm native, I'm Aani. But what I often did say was, I'm Grovant. That in itself is a cultural identity conflict that was passed on not from my people, but from French people, not even people who belong to me. They called us Grovant because they misinterpreted our sign language. We put the hands over our belly. And when we did that, we were meaning waterfalls, not big belly. So throughout the whole country, as I was traveling as a youth, I was telling people I'm Grovant. That in itself was wrong. Not wrong in the sense that I'm misidentifying myself, but wrong in the sense that I wasn't taught the difference between who is Aani versus Grovant. Taking pride in Grovant, seeing our people take pride in being Grovant, which is awesome. But a lot of people will say, I'm Grovant, and then pat their belly. Totally misinterpretation. That is not what Grovant means. You're not supposed to take pride, or you could, I guess, if you really, 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 really love your belly. That's fine. Love yourself. Love all that you are. But as I was moving all over the country, I had a hard time kind of finding self, like I said before. I was a white guy, then I became a kid that acted Black. Then I became a kid that acted as a Navajo because I hung around a bunch of Navajos in Gallup, New Mexico. And telling people that I was Grovant, telling people that I'm Indian, telling people that I'm from Montana, that I'm from Fort Belknap, Montana, but not really knowing what that meant. It kind of created a discord or a disconnection within self. As I kind of went all over the country and I finally got the possibility or the opportunity with my mom to move back to Fort Belknap, I started realizing after I started attending sweats, ceremonies, sun dances, cultural gatherings, that I started realizing, whoa, this is who I am. Wait, what are you talking about? I can pray to something else rather than Jesus or God? For me, that was different. Not saying it was wrong. For me, it was different. For me, there was a connection to my own cultural ways. There was a connection with when I heard my traditional language that felt just right. That felt unique. That felt who I was supposed to be and what I was supposed to learn this whole time. Then there was that anger, like Brooke was talking about earlier, where you question, how come you didn't teach me this? As a kid, how come you didn't teach me this? How come you withheld all this wealth of information, this history, this language, everything that we are and everything that I am, you withheld that from me. I don't blame anybody. I'm not hating on anybody. But at that time, as a young person, I was angry. I had abandonment issues. I had anger issues. I had grieving issues, all not knowing how to deal with those. But the only thing I knew how to deal with was obviously what I knew at that time was praying to the Bible, to Creator, to Mary, to Joseph, to God, everything that I knew, I was praying to them. Yet that never felt right with me. Not saying it was wrong, it just never felt right. But I continued to pray that way because that's what I knew. When I started praying with my own cultural ceremonial ways, my own medicines, my own sage and sweet pine and sweetgrass and bear root and all these beautiful things, there was that connection, not only with the grandfathers and grandmothers and creator, but also with Mother Earth, also with other beings that I felt were there, but I never really seen, but I knew they were there. So when I think about the intergenerational trauma, when I think about the boarding schools, when I think about what was being done to eradicate or erase who we were, I think about how well it was working and how well it is working still today. It saddens me. It drives me to, and I think that's why I do what I do today, to give people a sense of healing, to give our youth some sense of hope and aspiration and motivation to find out who they are. Because at one time, that's who I was. At one time, I knew more LL Cool J lyrics than I knew of my own language. I knew more Jodeci songs than I knew of my own traditional songs. That in itself is obviously working to eradicate or erase my language from who I am, because I fall back on what I know. I don't hate anybody. I'm not angry at anybody now. Now that I understand, now that I have a little bit more knowledge about where I'm going and what I want to be, and that I have resources at the tips of my hands. We have a dictionary now, Awnee Dictionary. We got Pekuni, my Blackfeet side, that have fluent speakers. We got the Confederacy going all the way up into Canada if I ever want to learn that language. Right at the tip of my fingers, I could call up somebody right now and say, how do you say this? Can you help me? How do you say I love you? How do you say a prayer in this language? A lot of us don't use what we have today because we're so distracted. Maybe we're so sick. Maybe we're working to the person's plan. The man's plan of eradicating ourselves. I always go around the country and I tell people this. I'm like, the reservations and what they're doing was placed so that all they had to do is sit back and watch us destroy ourselves. We are destroying ourselves with violence, lateral oppression. We are hating on each other for even wearing braids. Our own people will hate on another Native man, another boys with braids or whoever may be, for having braids. That's who we are. Our own people will hate on that. You will be made fun of if you're trying to speak your language. Oh, here's you want to go, let's go reservation slang. Oh, you trying to be too good or what? Speaking your language? Lateral oppression. It sucks. It really, really sucks. Intergenerational trauma is right now at the forefront. And it's something we battle all the time with our people. I even battle with myself. I'm right here, I'm battling with myself because there's that trauma within myself, because what was passed on from my grandma to my mom to me is still sitting here. And I'm still learning on how to heal that. And the only way that I see it possible through all my cultural teachings, my spiritual endeavors, is by knowing who I am, and knowing who I am is I am indigenous to this land. No one can ever take that away from me. You can take Casey Nicholson away from me. You can say you're no longer Casey Nicholson, but you'll never be able to take away my traditional name, because that's who I am, Wasnakak. And I can stand up here and say, Nanisa Wasnakak. This is who I am. That's who I am. At the end of the day, Ninana Awnee, Ninana Pekuni, that's who I am. I'm Scuppy Pekuni. I mean, I could go over and over and all these. This is who I am. And I could tell somebody who was trying to argue with me and tell them, this is who I am. You might have been able to push me back in the days when I didn't know diddly squat, but I know something now. I have knowledge, I have power, I have my ancestors behind me to show you, to illustrate to you I know who I am, and I'm going to continue to move forward with who I am. Even in walking these two roads with cultural ways, with educational ways. I'm a Native man sitting up here with a master's degree. That's a beautiful thing. I've made it in this white man's education, but yet I'm still making it in my cultural traditions, learning my language, learning how to sweat, learning or, making it through fasting for 4 days, not having any food or water, praying hard, knowing what it is to go without. That's a powerful thing to have in one's tool belt. There's like something, like I want to come up here and really kind of tell you guys about stuff, but I figured it'd be better, especially talking about this stuff, to tell you guys something from my heart. Because that's what I've been taught. You speak from your heart. Especially with this kind of stuff that's happening, that has happened. Residential schools, the survivors, the trauma, some horrible things that have happened. Think about those young kids that were so scared for just speaking their language, for following that's the only thing they knew. And they were told that they can't. They were told that they shouldn't. They were punished. They were molested or they were abused some way, somehow, for being who they were. So I always tell when I go around the country again, don't be afraid of who you are. Don't be afraid to be moved. If something sparks something inside you, don't be afraid to be moved into a direction of positivity, of knowing of who you are. I'm going to end with this little acronym that I've been speaking for years. And it is moved. Well, it is moved. MOVED. I came up with it through all my motivational speaking, through my wellness speaking. And the way I got to it was because at one time I was stagnant. I just sat there. I just accepted and was okay with being okay. What I mean by that is if someone has anxiety, they're okay with it. I'm going to take some pills and I'm just going to kind of get through. I'm okay with just having anxiety. If I have pre-diabetes, I'm okay with just having pre-diabetes. Just give me some pills. That's just an example. I'm not downplaying it at all. That's just an example. When you have an opportunity to start eating better, to exercise, to get your sugar down, to become as healthy as you can be, you have the opportunity, because a lot of people will be okay with just being okay. When there's an opportunity for growth and success, a lot of people don't take it. The first one of my moved acronym, M, is motivation. I always tell people you have this moment. I call motivation a moment. You see somebody lifting weights. You see somebody eating healthy. You see somebody speaking their language. You see somebody going to their ceremonies. You see somebody praying and you say, I wish I can do that. That's your motivation right there. It is a spark. A motivation is a spark. It's just going to be there constantly. There's always a motivation. What you do with that motivation is the gas that continues to light that flame, which these next letters will contain, is the gas that lights that spark to make a beautiful flame. Next one is openness. O, you have to be open to the possibilities in your life. That includes success and that includes failure. So many people are scared to fail. What if I say it wrong? What if I do it wrong? What if I do the ceremony wrong? What if I do this? And that, again, is intergenerational trauma, because when we did it wrong back in the days in the boarding schools, a lot of them were punished. So there was this little epigenetic kind of gene or epigenetic thing going on inside that creates this instantaneous fear that's happening inside us. Don't be scared of failing, because without failure, there is no growth. So be open to successes and failures. V, vision. You have to see yourself succeeding. You have to see yourself speaking your language. You have to see yourself healing. You have to see yourself changing into the person you want to become eventually. You have to see yourself as that person of quit being okay with just being okay and be great. That's vision. You have to see it. As a comedian, I see this whole auditorium full. When I tell my jokes, I see this whole auditorium laughing before my show, so that when I do come up, I have this confidence and know-how and knowing that everything's going to be okay, even if I fail. But I envision this crowd laughing. Okay? E is for evolve. You have to evolve. You cannot be like your mom. You cannot be like your dad. You cannot be like your grandpa. You cannot be like your uncles, your sister. You can't be like Drake. You can't be like Beyonce. You can't be like any of them. You have to evolve into that person that you ultimately want to become through all the motivation, through all the openness, through all the sight, the vision that you see yourself. You evolve into this person that you want to be. You see your grades evolving. You see your health evolving. You see your personality evolving. You see your spirituality evolving. You evolve into that human being. Now, the hardest part in this whole moved acronym is D, discipline. You have to be disciplined. You got to know to keep going no matter when it gets hard. If it's raining, if you want to go lose weight and then you've been losing weight with running and it starts sprinkling, then you say, no, I don't want to because it's raining. That's a lack of discipline to a point, okay? Discipline could be many different facets, okay? But you have to be disciplined. If you want to learn your language, which I am very not, which I really want to do, but the discipline is not quite there, but I'm getting it, okay? Once I know more, once I kind of get comfortable with it and I get supposed time, it's an excuse. There goes my whole discipline, right? When I give that an excuse, okay? I myself have to become more disciplined in the things that I want in life. Better comedy career, acting career, a better dad, a better husband, a better brother, uncle, all those things, okay? A better human being at the end of the day. So those are that's my acronym, MOVED, motivation, openness, vision, evolve, and discipline. But knowing all the stuff, I would have never got to that point, and I would have never been able to work towards who I am without the things that I've been through, without the realizations that I've had in my life, without the struggles that I've had in my life. I'm not perfect. I'll never claim to be perfect. I'll never claim to know more than anybody in this world. I'm a pitiful human being just trying to do the best I can on this world, not only for myself, but for my children. Maybe for those youth that might hear me speak one day. Maybe for that one elder that heard me speak and said, you know, those are some good words, but here's some additional medicine, I guess you'd say. Last thing before we leave off here. Remember, the words you speak is a ceremony. The words you speak is a ceremony because it holds so much power within those words. There's energy that comes with those words. That dialogue you share with somebody, that's a ceremony. Whether it be hate, whether it be love, whether it be encouragement, that's a ceremony. And how you hold your ceremonies is ultimately how well you're going to thrive in this world. Not survive, thrive in this world. Because I want each and every one of you, all those people that might be listening on social media, all the people here, the thousands of people here in attendance today, I want you guys to thrive and not survive and become the best human being that you know how to be. That is my time. Thank you guys very much. And at this time, thing is, I know, hey, keep your applause down. Keep your applause down. We're gonna, right now, we're gonna check in. We're gonna check in right now. And I don't know if we're gonna have things on the video or the social media stuff or here. So if anybody has anything to share or any questions, please come down to the mic, or is there a mic over there? There's a mic there. And we just want to hear how you feel. What did you see? What did you hear? You know, how did it make you feel? The things that you heard today. Is there any response to that? I'm going to give it some time here to kind of just sit there and kind of marinate. In social media, I think the people on social media, you can also type your questions, and I think we're going to be able to get it, and we can give some feedback from that as well, I believe. Anything that might have stayed or resonated with you? Or, oh,
Hi, it's me again. It's Christina. I know folks on social media can't see me, but I wanted to take an opportunity to once again just express my heartfelt and depth of gratitude to my relatives and the time that we've shared this evening. I want to also just share briefly some of the things that my heart is wanting to share in thinking about what it means to just be present and to be sharing in this work together today. And as we've been talking about surviving genocide, surviving residential schools, thinking about the significance of ICWA, I wanted to take a moment to honor my mother. And she is here on campus with us, and to share with you all some of what I carry with me in the work that I do in this existence. Because what motivates me and what motivated me is because I want to be a good relative to my mom. Somebody who cared for me in my most vulnerable times, somebody who taught me at a very young age that my body was not going to be respected in this society, somebody who taught me what it was to be hyper vigilant and to be aware of the threats and the dangers, but someone who also taught me how to love and to laugh and to really take time to appreciate those fleeting moments of joy and connection that do exist. The last thing that I wanted to share is to recognize that, as Brooke and others have shared, the anger that I also carry within me. And when I started out on my educational journey, I was very angry at my grandmother. I was angry at her because of her alcoholism. I was angry at her because I didn't know her stories and I didn't know what she endured in her time and in her life. And it took me a long time to listen and to learn and to recognize that people were afraid of my grandmother in many ways. And I like to imagine that I carry some of that positive feistiness with me in the work that I do here at Seattle U. But as I honor my mother and as I honor my grandmother and recognize that what motivated my journey, I also have to share that when my mother and her older brother and her younger sister were just babies, they were taken from my grandmother. And they were living in Montana at the time. And they were taken by Child Protective Services and shipped from Montana to Alabama and were placed with a family that promised to be a good Christian family and take care of them. And that is not what happened. And in many ways, we are still healing as a family from that violent removal of relatives from home, from community, from connection, who were then taken and harmed because they were considered not as important as some of the other relatives and beings that we share in this life with. And so as I come up here, I just wanted to share a little bit more with you all, because I want to be able to come with the strength that I have gained from that, but also not to erase all of that pain and all of that which we are carrying together. As I say that, my question for you all, if you don't mind, in the time that we have, is for those of us who were intentionally detribalized, for those of us who have been in urban spaces where we have been told repeatedly by various messages that we're not enough, that will never be enough, what might you offer those of us who are wanting to listen and learn and connect? Thank you.
I'll give it to Anna if you want to answer first on that. Did you hear the question?
Well, it's you're talking about a feeling on the inside, and then how do you move out of that and connect with others. And so it really is reaching out and trusting 2 or 3 people and building that relationship and starting to share, some of those weighted, anchored, the weight that's there. And you'll surprisingly find the commonalities, and you'll also feel the connection, which is so necessary to feeling a part of, and the connection to others and to the land, even if you're far from your own territories, because it's the human experience connection that is critical. I know that over the years, that's what has helped me. Those ones who had done their work in healing and then reached out when I reached out to them, and I felt less alone and less isolated, and then learned the words that I could speak in terms or use in terms of telling my own story. Is that, am I getting close to what you're asking? Because that's a great discussion question. Christina?
I'm here. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Did you, Casey? Brooke? Yeah. Thank you.
No, I don't have much more to share than what Anna did. I mean, I was looking for an answer myself, honestly. So I looked to my elders for that. And I agree that it's a discussion that we should all really have. But I also think Casey sort of answered that in a way that it's when, like, a part of questioning ourselves as Indigenous people, a part of that sort of, I don't know what to call it, but Casey referred to it as just the trauma that in boarding schools we were taught to we weren't doing things right, or we were treated badly for trying to speak our language. Or so I think there's that. I mean, that you hit the nail on the head. That's just ingrained. But what I tell others, I mean, I something that I always say is, if you're someone who identifies as Indigenous, then I accept that. I mean, certainly there are caveats to and dangers in that, which I think a lot of us in the community can easily recognize. But yeah, I mean, I think I look for those same answers, and a lot of us do. I don't know if Casey wants to add a little bit more. Thank you for that question.
I mean, honestly, it's a multi-layered question. I mean, it's a simple question, but yeah, I think it's so multi-layered because it really comes down to the individual and where they are and what place they feel to get those certain answers. Like I said, I was looking for all my answers all over the country, and I never found that answer until I put myself in a place where I was vulnerable, where I started getting answers. And it wasn't like this awing, wicked, crazy vision. It was just a simple moment when I, seen a deer walking behind me, and they didn't even know I was there. And that was like, whoa, I'm here. This is where I'm supposed to be in this moment at this time. And I accept that. Not trying to be anywhere else, but being in this moment at this time. Because in this time and in this moment, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. And what am I going to take from this moment and this time that I'm spending Am I going to be mad? Am I going to be angry? Am I going to live in that hurt and that resentment? Or am I going to take this time and see the beauty in everything? So there was a little mind shift there. And all I had to do was just take me to sit there and just calm down and relax and breathe and just enjoy what was all around me. And everything that was around me was, I felt connected to, I was a part of. So yeah, I might not speak my language at that time. Yeah, I wasn't like totally immersed into my culture or my traditions. But at that time, that's when I felt most connected. And I think for me, as a Native person, I was always searching for that through my whole life as a youth. I was always looking for that connection. And that connection was always there, but I was always too busy looking around. There's one thing I'll share with you to answer or to kind of end what I'm saying. One of my spiritual leaders or people that I looked up to said, if you walk with your head down too fast while holding too many things, you're going to miss the things that are intended for you. So meaning there's something always intended for you as you walk with your head down and everything. You got to let go of the things you hold on to so much, because that one, you'll never have enough room or enough energy to actually pick that one thing up that's intended for you, because you're holding on to anger, resentment, fear, bitterness, all that stuff. So let go is kind of one of the biggest things that I've been taught and what I learned. I think we're gonna go over to Misty. Misty, you close it up.
I wanted to see if there were any comments in chat. Is there any comments in chat that we wanted to share?
I can pick those up and share some of the chats.
Yes, please.
Okay, this is from Mary Jones to everyone. I feel echoes of truth. I feel amazing to hear such validation. Thank you. From Donna, thank you to all the speakers. Thank you, Brother Casey, for sharing your acronym. And from Sonia, thank you all for the gift of sharing your stories and for calling us and allowing us to listen.
Thank you. Appreciate that feedback.
Thank you. We have 2 minutes left. I'm going to ask one more question.
Oh, she had something, I think.
No, go ahead. We have one question left. Oh, no.
Hi, my name is Micaiah. I'm Comanche. I had to write my question down and what I wanted to say. What you said about being afraid to be moved, it really resonated with me, because sometimes I feel like those waves of trauma that were talked about earlier are just hitting me from all sides. Like they're so heavy down on me. And I have the traditional way on one way, you know, my family out on the reservation in Indian County who wants me to go one way, the white world, my white side who wants me to go the other way. And a lot of days I felt like my bloodline was just like a weight that I was dragging. And I felt like I couldn't move with this pressure on all sides, that if I did step out of line in any way, that I couldn't be too loud, that I couldn't be different, that I couldn't make one mistake. And I never knew why until you brought up intergenerational trauma and all these things. And a lot of times I just feel like I have no guidance. I know that what I'm doing doesn't feel right. I know that I feel like I'm living in a world that doesn't feel like mine. But my family, you know, all the other Native girls, they talk about how they have their shimasane to guide them. Mine tells me that I'm gonna burn in hell. And I just wanted to ask you, who do we turn to when those people who are supposed to be our compass, our support, what if they're too traumatized to tell us where to go?
Thank you. Anna.
Kamaya, thank you for your question and thank you for listening so deeply to yourself. That it's so it is such what you're aware of is just the beauty and the value of having a guide, the guidance. And I would invite you to look around you because you're asking for this. There's already someone who is out there waiting for you to establish relationship with. You can go to elders gatherings. There are things I think that happen there at SU where you can get support from others, where you can actually, like for me, what I did, because my relatives were far, my mother had died, I had no transportation, I had all of those different things, but I knew I needed some guidance. I looked for aunties. I looked for grannies and ones who were a little bit older who could just listen to me and be there for me and love me because I had a hole in my heart. And so it's those old ones, what they do is those aunties and those grannies out there is what they do is they sit with you. I mean, they just know you're okay. Even in your not knowing, you're like, okay. And that's what I would completely invite you to do is seek out those ones who are willing to sit with you or and begin to fill that little hole in your heart, because there are ones who have big hearts and compassion and care, and that's what you're wishing for and needing. So I just honor that, and people are out there. They just kind of show up, and I'm always surprised when it does. And I went to a gathering out in Michigan, and an elder came up and started talking with me, and it was exactly what I needed to hear. And she gave me so many little teachings. So anyway, they show up is what I'm saying, and I'm thanking you for that question. I encourage you to look for the healthy other to be with you.
Thank you so much for your question. I want to say the big thank you to saying your truth and coming here today. Everything that we've worked for, I feel like you're the reason why. So thank you for that. My name is Misty. I'm from Yakanuki. And I want to say a special thank you to everybody that made this possible, starting with Dr. Christina Roberts, made my vision come true. We started talking about this over 3 years ago. So this is just so special to me, and we're going to both keep fighting to make this happen. Thank you to Father Pat for opening with your prayer. Thank you, Natasha, for coming to represent the university and for your words. I will never forget them. They really gave me chills. Thank you. To my panelists, Elder Yatachowit and Anna Hansen, thank you for joining us from your home on Bainbridge. Casey Nicholson and Brooke Pinkham, you guys, I've looked up to you. I've seen your work. And I just want to say I'm so proud of everything that you guys have gone through to get your education, to raise your families here. And thank you for helping make this dream come true as well. So with that, we're going to end tonight's discussion, and thank you for tuning in from wherever you're at. Aho.
There's a last thank you there. Thank you, everyone, from Nathalie.
You can end the recording. Thank you.
Okay.